Bobby Wrinkle, I want to welcome you to Evening Upstairs at your library. His tombstone simply read, "A man ahead of his time." Pioneer African-American film director, writer, and independent film producer of more than 44 films, Oscar Micheaux is regarded as the first African-American feature filmmaker. Our speaker is professor in the Department of Cinema and Photography at Southern Illinois University. He obtained his master's at the University of Ohio, his PhD, University of Texas, and is the author of several works, and is currently completing a manuscript about Dr. Seuss, an animated film at Pixar Studios. Let's welcome our guest, Dr. Walter Metz, as he presents Oscar Micheaux and the Rise of African American Cinema.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Oscar Micheaux was born in 1884 in Metropolis, a farm outside Metropolis. Both his parents were slaves. Apparently, the French Huguenots settled in Virginia around the time of the American Revolution and traveled westward. And so they think that a large conglomeration of French Huguenots settled in northern Kentucky, and that's why the Micheaux have the name Micheaux. They would have been slaves owned by these French Huguenots. In 1901, Micheaux, at the age of 17, moved to Chicago with his older brother. He was one of 13 children. And what Micheaux discovered in Chicago was they hated the city. He found the northern migration to have resulted in continued African American poverty, but people that were hanging around pool halls and were card sharps. And this shows up a lot in his movies. Micheaux was heavily inspired by Booker T. Washington and believed in the importance of schooling that would generate jobs. He left his brother and started working as a Pullman porter and traveled the United States because of that. And he saved his money and then decided he would become a homesteader. So with the Pullman porter money, he bought a plot of land in Dallas, South Dakota, of all places. And he began writing everyone he knew that the solution was not the South, the Jim Crow South, nor the North, slums in the middle of northern cities, but the West. One of his brothers took him up on his offer, and no one else did. There's something of a tragic story. He was away on business a lot, and his wife, while he was gone on one of the trips, stole all his money. And so he decided to become a novelist. And so he wrote this novel, The Homesteader, in 1913, which is essentially an autobiographical novel. It's about his movement to the West and being a farmer. The novel was very successful, and so a Chicago-based filmmaker decided to make a movie about it. Micheaux's experience with that filmmaker was so negative, he decided, I can do this myself, and so he became a filmmaker. He started a company called the Micheaux Book and Film Company, continued to write novels, and then began to make movies. So what you'd have to know about filmmaking in the United States at this time, in the teens, is first of all, it was segregated. No white filmmakers, no black filmmakers were working in New York City, where most of film production was. And that continued as the film center of the United States shifted to Los Angeles. The only exception to this are minor bit roles in Hollywood films. And you know these roles, right? Maids in Gone with the Wind, porters. And so I thought I would start today by showing you a non-Micheaux film. And I want to show you the actor Clarence Muse. And Clarence Muse is one of the most talented actors in the so-called race cinema. And so what we have is a clustering of power in Hollywood, fully established by 1917, and that, of course, has not been broken till this day. at least until the mid-1950s, there's very little stable alternative film production in the United States. And so since African American people could not make movies, period, a separate cinema developed. And it developed from highly entrepreneurial people like Micheaux, and it also developed in northeastern cities with traditionally strong African American middle class populations. So for example, the most famous of the race movies is a film called The Scar of Shame. It was made in the 1920s by the so-called colored players of Philadelphia. So Philadelphia is a perfect place to see how and why so-called race movies developed. A strong alternative African American press in Philadelphia, and then a strong middle-class community in Philadelphia since the 17th century. And so from the period that Micheaux makes the first film directed by an African American in the United States, that film is Within Our Gates, 1919, through the late 1940s, there are films made by African American people for African American people that are essentially exhibiting in a completely separate circuit than the Hollywood cinema. So what Micheaux did, since he didn't have any connection to a stable African American middle class community, was essentially made his films, and you'll see some of the repercussions of making films on such low budgets, put them in his suitcase, and wandered around the country showing them. So without distribution, where all the money lies in Hollywood filmmaking, Micheaux's life was not an easy one. And yet what I want to show you is that the 3 films he made during the silent period are every bit as important as any films made in Hollywood. And I'll try to develop this, at least by getting you to see a couple of the really interesting things that happen in his silent films. By the time of The Coming of Sound, right, so The Jazz Singer is released in the fall of 1927, something incredibly important for this story happens in American filmmaking. It becomes extremely resource intensive to make a sound film. You need special recording equipment, and what you'll see here is the quality of Micheaux's films drop. And it's because the difficulty of making a film competing with Hollywood in the sound period is a great difference, whereas in the silent period, not so great. And I really think, having taught film history for 30 years, it is absolutely the case that Micheaux's films in the silent period compete fairly well against the major films that you hear from Hollywood. So for example, every time I teach film history, I show Micheaux's Within Our Gates instead of showing Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Whereas one wouldn't take this position in the 1930s, that you'll see here, just the technical quality of the Micheaux films from the 1930s is not good. It's not to say the films are not important in terms of African American film history. They're extremely interesting in terms of what Micheaux is trying to do. Micheaux is incredibly complex in terms of the difference between light-skinned and dark-skinned black people, about the relationship between white folks and black folks inside the narrative. These are among the most sophisticated films to deal with these kinds of problems. He's a very surprising filmmaker since he emphasizes the importance of the rural over the urban. His films are shockingly against the black church. He finds the black church one of the most dangerous institutions in African American social life. And so there's really interesting things going on in all these films, but I do want you to see the shift in quality between the silent period and the sound period. Now, that's not true for all films, and so I want to start with a race movie not made by Micheaux, and you'll see that the technical problems here persist from the Micheaux films, but the power of this actor, Clarence Muse, carries this scene. Broken Earth is about a farmer whose child is dying, and he sits above the child and prays. And I just want to show you a little bit of this so you can see what Clarence Muse is able to deliver in an incredibly underfunded filmmaking system. So this film is made in 1936, so I want you to imagine a Frank Capra movie, like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. That's also 1936. And so the aesthetic quality of this film cannot possibly compete with a film that Capra's making in Hollywood on a budget orders of magnitude bigger. But the film is carried by this performance by Clarence Muse. And I'm setting this up for you because I will then show you what Clarence Muse was allowed to do in Hollywood, and the difference is completely scandalous.
Because I'm trying, Lord. Trying to get in. Please. Joshua, is it grandson? You feel better? Oh, that's good. That's good, my boy. Oh, sometimes I'm storm-tossed and driven. I know not where to roam.
Okay. So the sequence before the cut to the dog is a continuous long take that lasts like 8 minutes. And so you see this transformation from the Clarence Muse character convinced the kid is dying to the moment where the prayer brings the kid back to life. Okay. So this is Clarence Muse, an actor of tremendous talent. This is Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt from 1943. And Clarence Muse is only allowed to play the porter.
Stewardess.
Yes,
You're almost in Santa Rosa. You won't be ready when you get into Santa Rosa.
I'm ready now, thanks.
Then I'll get all your bags out for you then. How you feeling, Miss Stewardess?
Pretty well. A little weak, but pretty well on the whole.
Harry, tell the porter you're a doctor.
That's it. That is Clarence Muse's appearance in Shadow of a Doubt. Okay, so you see what's at stake here in the studying of race movies, that these were not present in film history until the 1970s. I went to graduate school in the late 1980s, and the textbooks I used barely had a mention of Oscar Micheaux. And then academic culture began to think about the ways of reintegrating the African American experience into traditions like film history. And simultaneous to that, archives began being discovered that had these films. So what you need to know is that most of these films that we're going to talk about were not shot on safety stock, which means that if they weren't properly stored, they would outgas and produce acid that melted all the films. So a huge percentage of pre-1930s films are lost to film history. Many of these race movies were discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Tyler, Texas. How they survived on non-safety stock abandoned in a warehouse, I cannot tell you, in the middle of Texas, but they did. Most of the Micheaux films that I'm showing you tonight are from this beautifully new restored DVD Blu-ray collection called The Pioneers of African American Cinema. There are 9 Micheaux films in that collection. I watched them all over the weekend, and I've tried to piece together some way of thinking about what we see when we watch these Micheaux films. Okay. So let me start with the Micheaux film that I know best, Within Our Gates. I've been showing it for 20 years in my film history classes. I believe that Within Our Gates contains the most important sequence of film in the teens. And so here's the plot. There's this light-skinned African-American woman, Sylvia, and she lives in the north. She goes south and she meets a man who wants to start a school for black kids. So she goes back north and she talks to all the white people she knows. And she first asks this woman, with the title card says, she does not support suffragettism because that would mean black women might get to vote. So Sylvia asks this woman for money, and the woman goes on and on, I'm not giving you money. That woman's best friend hears the story and says to Sylvia, not only will I give you the $5,000 that I asked for the school, I will give you $50,000. And she's sticking it to her friend for being such a racist idiot. So this is the complexity of the way in which Micheaux builds characters. Generally, light-skinned people like Sylvia are the heroes of the movie. Generally, white people are awful in these movies, but not exclusively. And so I'll sort of point out the moments when that's not the case in these Micheaux movies. Okay, so Sylvia gets the money for this school. For reasons that don't quite make sense in terms of traditional film narrative, there's this massive flashback at the end of Within Our Gates where we get Sylvia's backstory, and that's the sequence that I want to show you. Sylvia's parents in the South were lynched, and we get this lynching scene. So as a film historian, what I want to do is to say, okay, there was this film, Birth of a Nation, that is a celebration of the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. It is the film that all film histories declare as the most important film of the teens. And so what Micheaux is up to is not directly, the Birth of a Nation was protested unsuccessfully by the NAACP. Micheaux is making films that indict the basic orientation of The Birth of a Nation, right? It's based on a racist novel, The Klansman by Thomas Dixon. And it indeed celebrates the formation of the Klan, which is a very strange thing to do. And so I want to show you the lynching scene. It's every bit as sophisticated as anything that goes on in Birth of a Nation. And it indicts Jim Crow culture properly. Okay, so I want to show you how it works. Okay, so we're in the middle of this flashback. Sylvia's already gotten the money for the school. There's a dark-skinned African-American guy, Ephraim, and his logic is that he'll toady up to the white people and then they'll treat him well. He's about to discover that was a very bad miscalculation. So this is a prime example of Micheaux's novelistic irony. We've already seen what really happened. What really happened was that Sylvia's father is a sharecropper. He goes to the white family that he sharecrops for, and the guy's cheating him. Because Sylvia's going to school, she gives him the numbers and says, "You're being cheated, go get your proper money." So he goes there, and he starts to have a fight with the white guy, the brother of this guy that you see here, Grillstone. And meanwhile, at the window is a poor white man who's also been cheated by the guy, who shoots him through the window. Ephraim, who's on the other side, only sees the guy get shot and sees the fight with Mr. Landry, and so Ephraim falsely delivers the news to the mob that Sylvia's father's the one who's killed Griddlestone. So what Micheaux provides here is what white newspapers are saying the truth is, when in fact we've already seen the cinematic truth that's incredibly different than this, and that produces the irony. This is Sylvia's mother, and they've escaped into the forest to escape the lynch mob. This is all being related in flashback, so we come out of the flashback. And the title card tells us that the sexual assault stops because it turns out Griddlestone is the father of Sylvia, and that's why she's light-skinned. So here's a perfect example of the ever-changing dynamics of the color line in Micheaux films. You've got the posse attempting to maintain the color line, and you've got the very parallel action that's occurring simultaneous in the Griddlestone mansion, indicating that the color line has already been obliterated by generations of white sexual violence on black women. Okay, so there's these 3 silent films that Micheaux makes. Within Our Gates from 1919, Symbol of the Unconquered, which is subtitled A Story of the Ku Klux Klan. So again, Micheaux returning to this original sin in film history of Birth of a Nation to try to rip it apart. So whereas Birth of a Nation celebrates the Klan, Symbol of the Unconquered demonstrates that it's a vigilante terrorist organization. And then Micheaux's crowning achievement in the silent cinema is 1925's Body and Soul. It features Paul Robeson's first film performance. And I just want to show you a moment that I think might be the most sophisticated piece of editing in American silent cinema. So here's the plot. There's a heroine who lives with her mother, and her mother's very religious. So an ex-convict comes to town, Reverend Jenkins, played by Paul Robeson, and he pretends to be a preacher. And so the mother is completely enamored of this preacher and won't hear anything negative about him. One night, the preacher rapes the woman's daughter, and the daughter knows that her mother won't believe her, so she flees to Atlanta. By the end of the film, the mother has gone to find the daughter and reconciles with her, but it takes 90 minutes of this film's runtime for the mother to realize that the preacher is in fact the evil villain in the film. Robeson plays 2 characters, the preacher and also this nice guy that the daughter wants to marry. And a sequence late in the film where it's revealed that the reverend is up to no good. What's happened is the mother has saved all this money by ironing other people's laundry, and her idea is that she's going to give that money to her daughter when she gets married. She wants the daughter to marry the reverend, so the daughter keeps saying, I'm not marrying the reverend. The daughter wants to marry the nice guy, Sylvester, and so the mom keeps the money in the Bible and has to keep it there the whole movie because the person that the daughter wants to marry is not acceptable to the mother. And I just want you to watch the delivery of what this money means. The title card here says blood money, that essentially Reverend Jenkins is stealing the money from the mother. And I want you to watch the cutting that occurs. Okay, so the film moves into close-up as this evil reverend guy is touching the money. And then there's a dissolve to the mother doing the ironing. That's how she got the money. And then there's this third shocking dissolve to cotton. And so what happens here is that Micheaux uses the visual complexity of silent cinema. Everything in silent cinema is told to you through images to place the full weight of the African American experience into the film. This is the picking of cotton from slavery to sharecropping that stands behind mom doing the ironing. She literally has done the ironing to get that money, but behind that stands generations of unequal distribution of labor in the United States. I cannot think of a more complex moment of editing in American cinema of this period. It is so subtle and understated. You watch it a bunch of times and you're like, what is that stuff? And you're like, oh, I think it's cotton. This is Micheaux at the pinnacle of his achievement. Indeed, it's true more generally that late 20s American silent cinema is the most sophisticated that American cinema ever got, right? Cinema suffered a massive reversion with the coming of sound because moving cameras had to be in cabinets because they were too loud for the sound recording equipment. All kinds of things happened to challenge this mode of filmmaking where the visual dynamics of film carried so much information. As I said at the start, this hit Micheaux doubly. So with Hollywood, with full amounts of capital resources, can fix the sound problems, Micheaux cannot. So I want to show you a moment from an early Micheaux sound film. This is Veiled Aristocrats from 1932. So what's really interesting is that Micheaux remakes as sound films almost all the films he made in the silent period. And Veiled Aristocrats is based on The House Behind the Cedars. This is a famous African-American novel of the turn of the century. And I just want you to listen to the sound recording, look at the way the film is designed, compared to what I just showed you from the blood money sequence from Body and Soul. This is a massive reversion. Okay, so the plot is this woman wants to marry this dark-skinned guy. Her mother won't have it, and so her brother comes home. That's what happens at the beginning of the film. And the mother says to the brother, I want you to design her life. And essentially what they're designing is that they're going to move from their hometown so that she can pass for white. And the daughter doesn't want to have this. So she writes a desperate letter to her boyfriend, Frank. And then after we look at the letter where she's like, please, my brother's trying to kidnap me, let's meet, they meet.
Now, my dear, what is this terrible something you wrote me? I can't imagine what it is. I've been puzzling over it.
I knew you couldn't guess what it was, dear. So I didn't go into any details in the note, as it was too much, and nothing but to see you, and try to tell you all about it with precise so. Here I am.
I see.
First, did you and your father have any discussion regarding me on the street yesterday?
Well, yes, we did. But I assure you
You
that...
don't have to assure me anything, Frank, dear. Just let me kiss you. Then you'll understand.
So what we have here is a film that is stunted in almost every way possible. The acting is atrocious, and the camera cannot move. Just to get this poor sound recording, the camera has to stay where it is. And so this is what a large amount of Micheaux films look like from the 1930s. Now, there's a number of reasons that Micheaux falls into decline. The Great Depression is one of them. The Hollywood film industry was relatively depression-proof. People wanted to spend a nickel to go see the movies, no matter what financial circumstances they were in. That does not seem to have been the case for Micheaux's audiences. And I think it's this shift from the silent cinema to the sound cinema. The weaknesses that are produced by Micheaux's low budgets show up in the sound films far more brutally than they show up in the silent films. Now, that's not to suggest that Micheaux didn't make interesting films. And so I want to show you, I think, his best film from the sound period. It's Birthright from 1939. And I want to go back to this idea of the complexity of Micheaux's representations. So race cinema is not simply an inversion of dominant Hollywood cinema. In dominant Hollywood cinema, black people are always the villains and white people are always the heroes. That's the story of Birth of a Nation. In Micheaux films, that's not the case. That there are certainly awful white people in these films because he wants to expose the legacy of Jim Crow. But at the same time, generally what he does, and I think this is a canny business strategy, is he always puts good white characters in these movies. So I told you about Within Our Gates, where one of the white women is just, I'm not going to accept suffragettism because it'll allow black women to vote. But then the other white woman is like, I'm going to screw her, so I'm going to show her that she's wrong, and I'm going to give Sylvia an order of magnitude more money for the school. Right? Okay. So something similar goes on here. So the plot of this film is that this mother sacrifices her entire life to send her son to college, and he goes north to Harvard. He comes back from Harvard, and he wants to build a school. So he goes to the white banker in town and says, I want to build a school. What he doesn't know is the white banker is at the heart of racism in the town. And so the banker comes up with this idea. He sells them a plot of land for the school where the deed says black people are not allowed to own the land. So essentially, the main character in the film gets swindled out of $100. So now he can't build the school, and he becomes a laughingstock in the town. White people are making fun of him. Black people are making fun of him. They're like, you go to Harvard and that's all you learn, how to be swindled? His own mother makes fun of him. And so in this sequence, which essentially converts the film from this early part of sort of blank despair to later in the film when he gets the money and he builds the school. And I'll show you how that happens. So he's been reading all day in the house, and his mom ridicules him. Don't you do any real work? What are you doing reading all day long? And she says, I've just gotten this can of salmon from a nice white family. They didn't want it anymore. So it turns out the white folks are giving the black folks expired food, and the can of salmon is poisoned. Okay? All right.
Well, Mother?
Where are you going, son?
For a walk, Mother.
You go out of that Sister Dildine, Peter.
No, I'm going to walk by myself. I'm tired, played out.
Tired? Played out? You ain't done nothing but sit and turn through some books and write on a little piece of paper.
Even that gets tiresome after a while.
Peter, you knows if Tumpac sees you, he's going to shoot you sure.
Oh, no, it won't. That's Tom's talk.
Talk? That ape done got crowned for killing 4 men already. Come in the house, son, and eat some supper. I just made some salmon croquettes for you. That'll spoil if you don't eat them now.
I didn't know you were making croquettes.
Yes, I got a can of salmons from Miss Cromwell that she old men couldn't quite use.
Look here, Mother, you're not using old canned goods that have been left over. I've told and told you about using any tainted or impure foods that the white people can't eat. It's too bad for them, it's too bad for you. You must absolutely quit eating leftovers.
Don't be so hasty, Peter, 'cause you done been brought up on leftovers. Is that you, son?
Yes, it's me, Mother. What's the matter, dear? Are you sick?
I ain't feeling so well. It's my stomach.
My mother, you are sick. What can I do?
Here, fill it from the kettle.
You need a doctor, and quickly. I'll go for John. Sorry on the telephone to maybe get him quicker. I'll go now. I'll run. Meantime, I'll go by Nan Berry and get her and send her here to look at you till I get back.
If Dr. Jalop should argue, then go see Captain Renfrew. You know where he lives, the big house on the hill.
My mother's sick, Doctor.
Who is it?
Caroline Sander. She's been taken suddenly with...
The fat negress who lives in a 3-room house on 12th Street, didn't she?
I'll show you the way.
No, Carolyn Siner owes me a $5 doctor bill already. Our county medical association has made a rule that no Negro should...
For great heavens, Doctor, it's too dangerous, Leo. She might die. I'll pay you.
Have you got the money there in your pocket?
No, but I can get it.
Yes, you can all get it. I'm tired of you Negroes running up doctor bills nobody can collect. You never have any money. Your wages are never large enough to garnish sheep. No, I'm not going. If you want me to visit her, go get $10. $5 for the old debt, the balance for this visit, and I'll...
If Dr. Jalop should argue, go see Captain Renfrew.
But who is it?
My name is Sander, Peter Sander. My mother's been taken suddenly ill. I've been to Dr. Jalop, but he won't go.
Oh, Peter Siner and Caroline is sick. Well, now, that's too bad. Step inside. I'll call up Jalop and have him stop here and pick us up, and we can go and see what's wrong with Caroline. Now, won't you step in, please?
She's mighty bad, Doctor.
Well, well, Caroline, what's this all about?
I'm sick, Doctor. Awful sick.
No, no, Caroline. Don't talk that way. I'm going to fix you up quickly. Quickly.
Okay, so you get this encounter that cascades from the first guy who doesn't seem to have gotten the memo from from Hippocrates, and then this Captain Renfro guy. So the Captain Renfro produces this transformation in the narrative. He can't save the mom, but what he does, he says to Peter, "I need a secretary. You're educated at Harvard. Will you work for me?" And so Peter says yes. And then Renfro writes Peter into the will, and when Renfro dies, that produces the happy ending at the end of the movie, which is Peter's able to build his school using the inheritance money from Renfro. Okay. All right. So I showed you the blood money part of Body and Soul, which I think is the most sophisticated thing that happens in Micheaux's silent films. Here's the most sophisticated thing that happens in Micheaux's sound films late in this film. And what you need to know about Micheaux's 1930s sound films is that they consistently, elegantly fold in African-American musical performance with these films, because he can do that, because they're sound films. And so there's this really interesting cut. There's a nightclub, and what I want you to notice is in the first sequence, the entire audience is white, and in the second sequence, the entire audience is black. There's no narrative justification for this shift in the movie. So there's two explanations, that they shot and they weren't attending to continuity. But that seems awfully strange. And the other explanation is the one I want to forward, and that is this is Micheaux again playing with the color line. That this one space is in fact a space that is catering both to white folks and black folks. And again, the film does not hammer you over the head with it, which is weird because these are melodramatic plots, right? The death of the mother is not what you would call a subtle moment in the movie. And yet this business about how space works in Jim Crow culture is handled incredibly deftly. Without any didacticism, the film essentially replicates what's happening to Micheaux out in the public space. His films can't be shown with Hollywood films. And yet he's doing things like renting out churches, renting out theaters after hours. So in fact, it's possible for a Micheaux film like this to have played at a place that's a whites-only theater that was rented out at midnight. So like the nightclub inside the film, the movie theater quite conceivably was whites only during the day and then was able to screen this film late at night, like at midnight when the theater was closed. I think that's what's going on here.
Cheap blues, the dog is hard to. When the moonbeams on a fire, the song rhythm was born. Let's raise the money for give a down was the Cinderella. Home on a man pillar, that's how rhythm was born. Everybody talking, down about Swan Shore. Cats are crying and say praise, all but till God rhythm on. And Katie Queen on the hot ground, who back moved to T-Town. I'll give you a heart, so don't doubt how rhythm was born. Tout, the banjos cry to deep blues, everybody high to. When the moon's on the bow, that's how rhythm was born. They praise the mighty forgiver, cut down things in the river, cold water made them quiver. That's how rhythm was born. Everybody to the kill, well, Swanee shore, catch a crazy friend, walk on two legs up the floor. It's kind of clean on the hot ground, who brought that move to T-Town? I'll give you a hot to go down.
So it's very important to realize that Micheaux is trying to make money. So from the present, we look back and we can sort of extract the political importance of his films. But when you watch these films, you notice that they're cannily designed to have people enjoy them. So extended musical numbers are a good example of what I haven't showed you from Micheaux, that at the time that he's making movies, remember carrying them around in his suitcases, he wants people to pay money to see them. And one of the ways is to incorporate musical performances in this way. But look at what happens to this theater, and nothing indicates the shift. There's no narrative explanation for why the audience in this nightclub has suddenly changed. We've merely cut away and had some more of the narrative develop, and then we cut back.
Some pack held up the jail and made them let me go, and I ran away. When I'd gone about a block, I heard a shot, and turning around, saw a top fall dead. Warfields took me to the country and kept me hid for 3 days. Then one night I slipped out and saw the persimmon peeping through the bushes. I didn't want to get the Warfields into trouble, so after midnight, I slipped away.
And so with this, I'll ask for questions. This is a puzzle. Is it the case that this was a mistake? It is most obviously a continuity error. That when you make a movie like this, you have a list of things that you need to get. We need this tap dance number, we need that, whatever that bikini number was. You shoot it in different days. Generally, in a high-budget Hollywood film, you'd have a continuity person that would keep track of who was sitting where, what were they wearing. It seems odd that the thing that you would forget is, the last time all the audience was white. That seems like an odd thing to forget. But it's fully possible. I'm sure these things were shot days, if not weeks, if not months apart. But when we watch the movie, what we discover is this transformation with no narrative explanation. We know in a higher budget movie, what would have happened was the studio heads would have forced somebody to reshoot this. Is it just a matter of budget, or is this actually accomplishing something in the film? And given the way Micheaux's playing with the color line in these other films, I'm kind of thinking that he's playing with it here too. And this is the beauty of Micheaux, not only the masterful silent films that you can study and say, yeah, this is every bit as good as what comes around it in the Hollywood system. Even these films that are so obviously made on lower budgets with shaky acting, with shaky set design, even these films draw our attention because they're doing such interesting thematic things. I thank you very much for listening. I would love to hear the kinds of things you're interested in. I have thousands of other clips that I wanted to show you, so if you're interested in something in particular, I'd be glad to explore it further with you.